A fed up empath doesn't snap. They wake up, and that waking up is the most terrifying thing to anyone who has gotten comfortable receiving your love without earning your safety. Because you were never the person who wanted to hurt someone. You weren't built for revenge. You weren't built to punish. You were built to understand. You were the one who read between the lines, the one who noticed the mood shift before anyone else did, the one who could feel someone's fear hiding underneath their coldness, and instead of judging them for it, you tried to love them through it. You made excuses for them that they never even asked you to make. You softened your needs so they wouldn't feel pressured. You lowered your expectations so they wouldn't feel trapped. You carried the emotional weight like it was your job because your heart didn't want to lose the connection, and your empathy convinced you that if you just stayed kind enough, long enough, they would eventually become the version of themselves you kept seeing in flashes. But waking up doesn't look like rage. It doesn't look like screaming. It doesn't look like you suddenly becoming cruel. Waking up looks like a quiet moment where something inside you finally stops negotiating. It's the moment you realize that your love has become a place you keep bleeding and you're the only one bringing bandages. It's the moment you realize that your compassion has been treated like a cushion, your patience has been treated like permission, and your understanding has been used to avoid accountability. You didn't just feel tired, you felt clear. Clear that you cannot keep saving a connection that keeps costing you your peace. Clear that you cannot keep explaining your humanity to someone who keeps acting like your needs are a problem. Clear that loving someone should not require you to abandon yourself. And what makes this waking up so powerful is that it changes your energy at the root. Before, you reacted. Before, you chased clarity. Before, you tried to fix the silence. Before, you would hear their distance and your anxiety would translate it into urgency. Say something, do something, don't lose them. But when you wake up, you stop chasing. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped panicking. You stopped proving. You stopped begging. You stopped writing paragraphs trying to be understood by someone who keeps leaving mid-sentence. And that's when the dynamic breaks, because the dynamic was never held together by their consistency. It was held together by your effort. A fed-up empath becomes dangerous because they become steady. Their kindness becomes intentional. Their presence becomes earned. Their softness gains a gait. And the people who benefited from your endless access start to feel the difference immediately because they were used to your heart being available on demand. They were used to your forgiveness arriving faster than their apology. They were used to your warmth returning even when they offered you coldness. They were used to you being the one who repairs. And when you wake up, you don't announce it. You just stop. You stop filling the gap. You stop cushioning the consequences. You stop taking emotional responsibility for someone else's emotional immaturity. This is why waking up is more powerful than snapping. Snapping gives them drama to blame. Snapping gives them a story where you were too much. Snapping gives them an exit that feels justified. But waking up gives them nothing to hold against you. Waking up looks like calm boundaries. Waking up looks like your silence, not as a tactic, but as a decision. Waking up looks like you saying once, I care, but I'm not doing this cycle anymore. And then you actually living like you mean it. That is what shocks them, because it's final without being cruel. It's strong without being loud. And if you're that empath, I need you to know this. Your waking up is not a loss of love. It is an evolution of it. It is love, finally including you. It is you realizing you can be compassionate and still have standards. You can understand someone's wounds and still refuse to bleed for them. You can forgive and still not return. Because your empathy was never meant to be your prison. Your empathy was meant to be your gift, and gifts are sacred. They are not supposed to be handed out to people who keep dropping them. The fed-up empath doesn't snap. They wake up, and once you wake up, you don't go back to sleep just because someone finally notices the silence you've been screaming through for so long. Empaths don't become dangerous by being cruel. They become dangerous by becoming unavailable. And that unavailability is not bitterness. It's boundaries finally taking a breath. Because for so long, your availability was your love language. You answered quickly. You forgave quickly. You held space even when you were hurting. You checked in even when you weren't being checked on. You gave comfort even when you were the one who needed it. And you did it because you genuinely cared, because you could feel what other people felt, because you thought that if you stayed soft enough, the other person would eventually become safe enough. But being available all the time, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, is not love. When the other person is inconsistent, it becomes a resource. It becomes something they can take from you without ever fully choosing you. Your warmth becomes their medicine. Your forgiveness becomes their escape. Your emotional labor becomes the bridge that saves them from having to build one. And the longer that goes on, the more your kindness starts functioning like permission. Permission for them to do less. Permission for them to avoid accountability. Permission for them to keep you close without showing up fully. So when an empath becomes unavailable, it feels like a shockwave. Not because the empath is trying to punish, but because the empath stops supplying the benefits of their heart. They stop being the automatic source of reassurance. They stop being the person who resets the connection after every withdrawal. They stop being the one who explains themselves until their throat is tired. They stop being the one who stays in the conversation while the other person disappears and returns as if nothing happened. Unavailability is not cruelty. Unavailability is the moment you stop bleeding quietly and start protecting your peace. And the reason this is dangerous is because it removes the safety net that other people relied on. The avoidant relied on your softness being there when they returned. They relied on your patience to erase the consequences. They relied on your empathy to reinterpret their distance as stress or fear, instead of what it actually felt like to you, abandonment. They relied on your understanding to excuse what they never took responsibility for. They didn't have to face your pain because you kept wrapping it in kindness, and kindness can hide the truth. Unavailability reveals it. When an empath becomes unavailable, they stop reacting. They stop jumping at breadcrumbs. They stop responding instantly to late-night messages that used to control their emotions. They don't fight, they don't beg, they don't demand. They simply become harder to access, not as a game, but as a standard. Their time becomes protected. Their attention becomes intentional. Their love becomes selective. And that shift is terrifying to someone who has benefited from the old version of you, because the old version of you was predictable. The old version of you would come back. The old version of you would forgive. The old version of you would keep the door open, even when your heart was breaking. Unavailability also changes how you see yourself. You stop living in anticipation. You stop watching your phone like it's a lifeline. You stop abandoning your own life to keep space for someone else's inconsistency. You start building routines that don't depend on their mood. You start sleeping again, eating again, laughing again. You start reconnecting with friends. You start focusing on work, on health, on goals. And the most beautiful part is, you don't do it to get them back. You do it because you finally realized you lost yourself trying to keep someone else close. And here is the truth. Some people only value you when they cannot access you easily, because easy access makes them lazy. If your warmth is always available, they stop noticing it. If your forgiveness is always guaranteed, they stop earning it. If your love is always waiting, they stop choosing it. So your unavailability becomes a mirror. It forces them to see what they were taking for granted. It forces them to face the consequence of their distance. It forces them to feel the absence of the comfort you provided. That's why it feels dangerous, because it wakes people up. But remember, the goal is not to become unreachable. The goal is to become respected. The goal is not to punish. The goal is to protect. The empath becomes dangerous when they become unavailable, because unavailability is the moment your love stops being a free service and starts being a sacred gift. And anyone who cannot honor it loses access, not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough to stop giving your heart to someone who keeps handling it like it's disposable. The avoidant loses power when the empath stops reacting, because the entire push-pull dynamic is fueled by your nervous system, not their courage. And that's a painful thing to admit, because it means the relationship was not being carried by mutual effort. It was being carried by your emotional response. They pulled away, you reached, they went cold, you warmed the room. They went silent, you filled the silence with explanations, with reassurance, with more love, hoping love would make them feel safe. And the more you reacted, the more the cycle repeated, because reaction is predictable, and predictability is what made them comfortable. An avoidant can handle anger. Anger gives them a reason to detach. Anger gives them a label to put on you: too much, dramatic, needy. Anger turns the focus away from their inconsistency and onto your emotions. That's why your reactions have always been the lever. When you argue, they retreat. When you plead, they delay. When you chase, they control the pace. And even if they never say it out loud, a part of them learns, I can regulate closeness by triggering their attachment. Not necessarily as a strategy, but as a pattern. Your reaction becomes the proof that you're still invested, still available, still waiting, and that proof gives them power. But when the empath stops reacting, the lever breaks. You stop feeding the pattern. You stop turning their distance into a crisis. You stop translating your pain into 10 messages. You stop asking questions that beg for reassurance. You stop filling the gap they created. You become calm in a way that is not numb, not cold, not cruel, but grounded. Grounded means you feel the ache, but you don't act from it. Grounded means you notice the urge to chase, and you don't obey it. Grounded means you let silence exist without scrambling to fix it. And that is the moment the avoidant begins to feel something they hate feeling: uncertainty. Because the avoidant's comfort is control. Control over closeness, control over timing, control over how much they give and when. And your reactions were the map. Your reactions told them how far they could go, how long they could disappear, how little they could offer before you started chasing again. When you stop reacting, they lose the map. They don't know where they stand. They don't know if you're still waiting. They don't know if they can disappear and return to the same warmth. And that uncertainty can wake them up because it forces them to face what they've been avoiding, the possibility of losing you for real. But here's the deeper truth. When you stop reacting, you reclaim yourself. You stop giving away your power in small moments. You stop letting their mood decide your mood. You stop letting their silence rewrite your self-worth. You stop twisting yourself into the version of you that feels safe to them. And you start becoming the version of you that is safe for you. That is what changes everything, because you can't heal in a dynamic that constantly triggers you. Your nervous system has been living in a loop: hope, fear, relief, panic, repeat. And stopping your reactions is how you break the loop. This doesn't mean you become indifferent. It means you become discerning. You start watching behavior instead of chasing words. You start measuring consistency instead of clinging to chemistry. You stop treating breadcrumbs like a meal. You stop rewarding distance with devotion. And the avoidant feels that because for the first time, you are not offering them a quick way back into your warmth without accountability. For the first time, they can't reset the relationship with a casual message. For the first time, they have to meet you where you are in truth, not in your anxiety. And if they come back, it will not be because you begged, it will be because your calm revealed the consequence. And if they don't, you still win. Because the most dangerous thing an empath can do is stop reacting and start choosing themselves. Because once you stop reacting, you stop being controllable. You stop being predictable. You stop being easy to keep in limbo. You become steady, you become clear, you become anchored. And the person who once used distance to hold power suddenly realizes the power was never in their silence. It was in your willingness to chase it. When an empath chooses silence, it's not a tactic, it's closure. And that is what shocks the avoidant most, because an avoidant is built to survive through ambiguity. They are comfortable in the gray. They can live in the undefined space where nothing is fully said, where nothing is fully promised, where nothing is fully owned. That gray gives them room to breathe, room to retreat, room to return, room to control closeness without having to admit they are controlling it. And for a long time, you lived in that gray with them, not because it felt good, but because your empathy kept hoping the light would eventually come on, that one day they would finally choose you clearly. You tried to make silence mean something hopeful. You told yourself they're just overwhelmed. You told yourself they just need space. You told yourself they'll come back when they calm down. And sometimes they did come back, just enough to keep the story alive, just enough to keep you invested, just enough to stop you from letting go. That's why your silence now feels like closure, because you are no longer using your imagination to fill the empty spaces. You are no longer building a relationship out of potential and intermittent warmth. You are finally letting the facts speak, and the facts have been saying the same thing for a long time. that love without consistency becomes pain with a nice name. Closure isn't a conversation you have with someone who keeps disappearing. Closure is a decision you make when you realize you can't keep handing your heart to a pattern that keeps dropping it. Closure is the moment you stop trying to understand what is actually disrespectful. Closure is the moment you stop explaining your needs like they are optional. Closure is the moment you accept deeply that someone can have wounds and still be responsible for the way they treat you. And when an empath reaches closure, they don't storm out. They don't slam doors. They don't drag the other person into a final argument. They go quiet because there's nothing left to say to someone who has already heard you and still chosen distance. This is why silence from an empath lands like an earthquake. The avoidant expects reactions, even negative ones. They expect tears. They expect anger. They expect long messages. They expect you to reach out after a few days because your heart will ache and your empathy will soften you again. They expect you to reopen the door because in the past, you did. But closure silence doesn't reopen the door. Closure silence is not a pause, it's an ending. It's not, I'm trying to get you back, it's, I'm finally done losing myself here. And the avoidant doesn't know how to handle that because their distance only works when you stay attached enough to keep the thread alive. Your closure silence removes the most powerful thing you ever gave them, the chance to return without accountability. Because if you were still reacting, they could return later and blame timing, stress, confusion. They could act like nothing happened, and your desire for peace would make you accept it. But when your silence is closure, you don't accept the reset. You don't accept the casual hey that ignores the damage. You don't accept crumbs as proof of love. You don't accept a half return that keeps you in limbo. You stop responding to the pattern, and without your participation, the pattern dies. And this silence is heart-touching because it wasn't your first choice. You didn't want to become quiet. You wanted connection. You wanted safety. You wanted the kind of love where you don't have to guess. But you reached the edge of your own endurance. You realized that staying soft without boundaries was not kindness. It was self-abandonment. So your silence became a way to finally protect the part of you that kept getting wounded. It became a way to finally honor your own nervous system. It became a way to finally stop turning pain into patience. So if someone calls your silence a game, they don't understand what it cost you. Your silence is not a move, it is a recovery. It is you choosing peace over the addiction of hoping. It is you choosing clarity over the chaos of uncertainty. And yes, that is why it shocks the avoidant because it's the first time they can't pull you back with distance. The first time your empathy doesn't reopen the door. The first time your love has a boundary strong enough to be final. And once an empath reaches closure, they may still care. They may still feel love in their chest, but they will not return to the version of themselves who begged to be chosen. That version is gone, and that is the most dangerous thing of all. The real danger is the empath's transformation, because once an empath becomes free, they don't come back the same. And the people who benefited from the old version of them feel that like a loss they can't name. The old version of you was soft in a way that was accessible. You forgave quickly. You explained patiently. You gave the benefit of the doubt even when the doubt was screaming. You stayed open even when your heart was bruised. You could be hurt and still show up with love in your hands because you believed love could heal what fear kept breaking. And maybe that was beautiful. Maybe that was rare. But it also made you easy to keep in a cycle because the cycle had a guarantee, your heart. Transformation begins when that guarantee ends. It doesn't start with revenge. It starts with exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that sits in your bones, not because you're weak, but because you've been strong for too long. You've been the one who holds space, the one who repairs, the one who understands, the one who stays calm while you're dying inside. And one day you realize, this is not a relationship. This is me performing love alone. That realization doesn't make you angry at first. It makes you quiet. It makes you honest. It makes you stop romanticizing the struggle. And in that quiet, you begin to change. You start to feel your power, not the power to hurt someone, but the power to stop being hurt. You stop offering endless access. You stop chasing closure from people who can't give it. You stop explaining your boundaries like they're negotiable. You stop treating consistency like a bonus and start treating it like the minimum. Your nervous system begins to heal because it's no longer living in constant suspense. And as your nervous system heals, your standards rise naturally, not as an attitude, as a self-protection. When you are calm, you can see clearly. When you are clear, you can't unsee the truth. And once you can't unsee it, you can't go back to pretending that breadcrumbs are love. This is why the empath becomes dangerous, because they stop being emotionally available to chaos. They stop responding to hot and cold with more warmth. They stop rewarding distance with devotion. They stop handing out forgiveness without accountability. They don't hate, they don't attack. They simply become harder to access. And not because they're playing a game, but because they learned something sacred, that love without boundaries is not love, it is self-abandonment. And transformation changes your identity. The old you might have been afraid to lose them. The old you might have measured your worth through their attention. The old you might have confused longing with destiny. But the new you, the transformed you, becomes willing to stand alone rather than shrink. The new you starts building a life that isn't held hostage by someone else's mood. You reconnect with yourself, your friends, your routines, your goals, your body, your laughter. You stop living in anticipation. You stop living in apology. You stop living like your heart is a waiting room. And when your life becomes full again, you stop chasing what doesn't choose you, because your life no longer has space for what drains it. This is the part that hurts people who took you for granted, because your transformation removes the old doorway back to you. Before, they could return with a simple message. Before, they could appear after weeks and still receive your warmth because you missed them, because you wanted peace, because you wanted the story to continue. But the transformed empath doesn't reopen the door for a half return. They don't accept casual contact that ignores the past. They don't accept apology-free reconnection. They don't accept intimacy without consistency. Not because they are punishing, but because they are protecting what it took them so long to rebuild, their self-respect. And here is what I want you to feel deeply. Your transformation is not a loss of your empathy, it is the maturity of it. You are still kind, but you are no longer naive. You still care, but you don't confuse care with access. You still love, but you love yourself enough to require effort. That is the real danger. Not that you became hard, but that you became whole. Because a whole empath doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't settle, doesn't stay in limbo. A whole empath can walk away with tears in their eyes and peace in their spine. And once you become that person, you are no longer controllable by inconsistency. You are no longer seduced by potential. You are no longer trapped by hope. You are free. And freedom is the one thing an avoidant cannot compete with unless they are willing to grow.